Sarah Carter's trembling fingers hovered over the government email confirming her $30 billion federal contract, the largest infrastructure deal in American history. But she couldn't celebrate because across town, her husband Daniel was filing divorce papers, abandoning her and their dying son Michael to marry her best friend, the woman who'd held Sarah's hand through every hospital visit, every devastating prognosis, every midnight prayer. Sarah had built Carter Engineering Solutions from nothing, working double shifts while Daniel climbed corporate ladders, and her best friend Rachel whispered encouragements, unaware that behind her back they'd been planning their escape from her poverty for months. The irony was suffocating. The morning she became a billionaire, she lost everything that mattered, or so she thought. Daniel believed he was trading up, leaving behind medical debt and a dying child for Rachel's family wealth and social status. But he had no idea that the worthless wife he discarded had just signed the deal that would make her one of the most powerful women in America. What happens when a man who divorced his wife for being poor discovers she's now richer than his wildest dreams? What happens when betrayal becomes the greatest gift you never asked for? And what happens when the woman he abandoned decides that revenge isn't about destruction, but about rising so high that even those who betrayed her must look up to witness her triumph? Sarah's phone buzzed at 5:47 a.m., the notification lighting up the darkness of the hospital room where she'd spent another sleepless night beside Michael's bed. Her 7-year-old son's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, kept alive by machines that hummed their expensive lullabies. She reached for her phone with exhausted fingers, expecting another overdue bill notification, another insurance rejection, another reminder of how thoroughly life had broken her. Instead, she saw the subject line: Federal Infrastructure Contract, Final Award Notification. Her heart stuttered. For 3 years, Carter Engineering Solutions had been bleeding money, surviving on small municipal projects, and Sarah's refusal to surrender. She'd submitted the proposal for the Northeast Corridor Modernization Project months ago, a Hail Mary bid she never expected to win against corporate giants with armies of lawyers and decades of political connections. The email loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Then she saw it. Congratulations, Ms. Carter. Your firm has been selected as the lead contractor for the $30 billion Northeast Corridor Modernization Project. $30 billion. The number didn't feel real. Sarah read it again, then again, her vision blurring with tears she'd thought she'd run out of months ago. Her company, her tiny, struggling, somehow still breathing company, had just won the largest federal infrastructure contract in United States history. She wanted to scream, to laugh, to wake Michael and tell him that everything was going to be okay now, that they could afford the experimental treatment, that they'd never have to choose between medication and rent again. But Michael needed his rest, and besides, there was someone else she needed to tell first. She grabbed her second phone, the one Daniel had insisted she keep for family emergencies only, and pulled up his number. Her thumb hovered over the call button when she noticed the time. Daniel would be at the gym, then heading to his executive breakfast with Rachel's father, finalizing the merger that would make him vice president of Chen Morris Financial. He'd been talking about nothing else for weeks, about how this was his chance to finally break through, to become someone who mattered. Sarah had listened patiently, encouraging him even as their son's medical bills piled higher and his visits to the hospital grew shorter and shorter. She decided to wait, to tell him in person, maybe over dinner tonight. They could celebrate both wins, his promotion, her contract. Maybe this would be the turning point they needed. Maybe money would fix what had been breaking between them for so long. She allowed herself that hope for exactly 7 minutes before reality shattered it. The text message came from Rachel at 6:15 a.m. Rachel, who'd been Sarah's best friend since college. Rachel, who'd held her hand through Michael's diagnosis. Rachel, who'd promised just last week that Sarah wasn't alone in this nightmare. The message was simple, almost casual. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Find out what? Sarah's stomach dropped. She opened her email again, scanning for something she'd missed, some clause or condition that invalidated the contract. Nothing. Then she saw it, an email that had come in overnight, buried beneath the government notification, from Daniel's lawyer. The subject line, Dissolution of marriage, final documents. Her hands went numb. She clicked it open, the legal language blurring into a single, brutal fact. Daniel had filed for divorce. Not only filed, finalized. He must have been working on this for months, preparing everything in secret while she worked 16-hour days and sat vigil beside their dying son. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and requested full dissolution with no spousal support, claiming Sarah's business had significant undisclosed assets. That would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. Until this morning, Carter Engineering Solutions had been worth less than the medical debt they'd accumulated. Another text from Rachel. We didn't want to hurt you. We fell in love. You have to understand. A third text. Seconds later. Daniel and I are getting married next month. I hope someday you can forgive us. Sarah's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room spun. Michael stirred in his sleep, and she forced herself to stay quiet, to hold the screaming inside. Daniel and Rachel, her husband and her best friend. The two people she'd trusted most in the world. The two people who'd witnessed her lowest moments and promised to stand by her. They'd been planning their future together while she'd been fighting for her son's life, while she'd been begging insurance companies for coverage, while she'd been signing away equity in her company just to keep the lights on. The cruelty of the timing crashed over her in waves. If Daniel had waited just one more day, just hours, he would have known about the contract. He would have known that the wife he was abandoning for being poor had just become a billionaire. He would have known that the worthless company he dismissed in divorce proceedings was now worth more than Rachel's entire family fortune. But he didn't wait. He'd filed the papers yesterday, probably celebrated with Rachel over champagne, while Sarah sat in this hospital room, holding their dying son's hand. She looked at Michael, his small face peaceful in sleep despite the tubes and wires. Daniel hadn't visited in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. He'd claimed work was too demanding, that the merger required his full attention, that he'd come soon. Sarah had believed him, had made excuses for him to Michael when their son asked where Daddy was. Now she understood. Daniel had already left them. He'd just been waiting for the paperwork to make it official. Her phone buzzed again. Another email, this time from her business partner Jennifer. Sarah, did you see? We got it. We actually got it. Call me the second you wake up. Jennifer didn't know about the divorce yet. Nobody knew. Sarah was probably the last person to find out about her own marriage ending. She stood up slowly, her legs shaky, and walked to the hospital window. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably with Rachel, celebrating their new life together, relieved to have finally escaped the burden of a sick child and a struggling wife. They had no idea that the woman they'd discarded was now holding the keys to an empire. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, something cold and clear and powerful. The grief was there, sharp as ever, but beneath it grew something else. Resolve. Michael needed her to be strong. Her company needed her to be focused. And she needed to prove, not to Daniel, not to Rachel, but to herself, that she was worth more than their betrayal suggested. She wouldn't call Daniel. She wouldn't beg or cry or demand explanations. She would sign the divorce papers without contest, let him have his freedom, let him marry Rachel in whatever lavish ceremony they'd planned. And then, when the time was right, when the world knew her name and her success was undeniable, she would make sure they both understood exactly what they'd thrown away. Not through revenge, she didn't have the energy for that, but through becoming so successful, so powerful, so undeniably triumphant that even their whispers of her name would carry the weight of their mistake. Michael's monitor beeped softly, pulling her back to the moment. She returned to his bedside, took his small hand in hers and made a silent vow. She would survive this. She would save her son, and she would build something so magnificent from the ashes of her shattered life that even betrayal would look like mercy in hindsight. Her phone buzzed one last time, a text from Daniel sent hours ago, probably before he knew she'd find out. Sarah, we need to talk. I'll come by the apartment tonight. She deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to say to a man who'd already said goodbye. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her new corner office on the 42nd floor of Tower Plaza, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a conquered kingdom. Carter Engineering Solutions had exploded overnight, from a 3-person operation into a corporation with 400 employees and counting. The $30 billion contract had triggered an avalanche of opportunities. Private firms wanted partnerships, senators requested meetings, international corporations sought consultations. Jennifer had quit her job at Morrison & Associates to become full-time COO, and together they'd been working 18-hour days to manage the impossible growth. The success felt surreal, like living someone else's life. Every morning, Sarah expected to wake up back in that cramped apartment with unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter. Instead, she woke up in a penthouse suite near the hospital, where Michael now received treatment from the country's best pediatric specialists. The experimental therapy was working. Not a cure yet, but progress, real, measurable progress that filled her with hope she'd forgotten how to feel. But success came with unexpected complications. The media had discovered her story, and they loved it. The struggling single mother who'd won the biggest government contract in history while her husband divorced her. They didn't know about Rachel yet, didn't know that her best friend was the woman Daniel had left her for. Sarah had kept that detail private, not out of loyalty to them, but because Michael didn't need to see his mother's betrayal dissected on cable news. The elevator dinged behind her. She turned to see Jennifer entering with an envelope in hand. Her expression strange, somewhere between anger and satisfaction. "This just arrived by courier, hand-delivered. You're going to want to sit down." Sarah took the envelope, noting the expensive cream cardstock and gold embossing. Inside was a wedding invitation. "Daniel Chen and Rachel Morrison request the honor of your presence at their marriage ceremony. The date was set for 2 weeks from now at the Chen Estate, one of the most exclusive venues in the state." Rachel had taken Daniel's name already, apparently, or maybe it was a mistake on the printer's part. Either way, the symbolism stung. "They invited you to their wedding," Jennifer said flatly. "I mean, I knew they were narcissists, but this is psychotic." Sarah studied the invitation, running her thumb over the embossed lettering. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to throw it in the trash and forget Daniel and Rachel existed. But another part of her, the part that had been growing stronger and colder over these past weeks, saw an opportunity. They'd invited her either out of some twisted sense of etiquette or because they genuinely believed she'd be too broken to attend. Either way, they clearly hadn't been paying attention to the news. They had no idea what she'd become. "I'm going," Sarah said quietly. Jennifer's eyes widened. "You're not serious. Sarah, why would you put yourself through that? You don't owe them anything, least of all your presence at their—" "I'm going because they need to see me," Sarah interrupted. "Not the woman Daniel left. Not the struggling single mother from the hospital. Not the best friend Rachel betrayed. They need to see who I am now, what I built without them. What they walked away from." She set the invitation on her desk with deliberate care. "Besides, it'll be good for business. Victor Chen will be there, Rachel's father, and half the state's political establishment. I should probably make an appearance." "You're using their wedding as a networking opportunity," Jennifer said slowly, then laughed. "That's brilliant and slightly terrifying. I'm coming with you." "No need, I can handle this alone." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to." Sarah felt gratitude warm her chest. Jennifer had been her rock through everything. The divorce, the company explosion, Michael's treatment. Some friendships were tested by fire and emerged stronger. Others apparently couldn't survive the heat at all. She thought of Rachel, who'd promised eternal friendship over countless bottles of wine and late-night conversations. How easily those promises had shattered the moment something better came along. Her assistant knocked on the open door. "Miss Carter, your 3 p.m. is here. Senator Wallace and the Transportation Committee?" Sarah straightened her blazer, switching mentally into business mode. "Send them in. Jennifer, can you pull the Phase 2 projections? I want to show them what's possible if they expand the funding." As the senators filed in, filling her office with the scent of expensive cologne and political ambition, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. She looked different now. Not just the designer clothes or the professional styling, but something in her eyes. A hardness that hadn't been there before. Daniel and Rachel had broken something in her, but what grew back was stronger than what they destroyed. That night, after Michael fell asleep in his hospital bed, his color better now, his breathing easier, Sarah sat in the chair beside him and finally let herself cry. Not for Daniel or Rachel, or even for their betrayal. She cried for the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago, the woman who'd believed that love and loyalty mattered more than money, who'd thought that marriage meant partnership and struggle as well as success. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone harder and wiser and infinitely more alone. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender, Rachel Morrison. The subject, "Please read." Sarah deleted it without opening it. Whatever Rachel had to say, whatever justifications or apologies or explanations she'd crafted, they didn't matter anymore. The only conversation that mattered now would happen in 2 weeks at a wedding she planned to attend, not as a guest but as a statement. She would walk into that ceremony dressed in power and success, and she would make sure that everyone present, especially Daniel, especially Rachel, understood exactly what they'd lost. Michael stirred in his sleep, reaching for her hand with the unconscious trust of a child who still believed his mother could fix anything. Sarah held his small fingers gently, feeling the steady pulse of his heartbeat, and made a promise. She would survive this betrayal. She would build an empire, and she would do it all while being the mother her son deserved, even if his father had chosen to become a stranger. The invitation sat in her bag, a small rectangle of cardstock that represented so much more than a wedding. It represented a reckoning, and Sarah Carter was very much looking forward to it. The Chen estate sparkled under string lights and late afternoon sun, a monument to old money and carefully cultivated prestige. Sarah stepped out of her hired car. She'd refused the limousine Jennifer had suggested, preferring understated elegance to obvious displays of wealth, and paused at the bottom of the stone steps. The estate sprawled before her like something from a period drama, all manicured gardens and classical architecture designed to intimidate. Guests in designer gowns and bespoke suits filtered through the main entrance, their laughter carrying on the breeze. She'd chosen her outfit with strategic precision, a navy dress that whispered wealth without shouting it, paired with simple diamond earrings and Louboutin heels that added 3 inches to her height. Her hair was swept back in an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless but natural. She looked successful, composed, untouchable. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd turned catastrophe into conquest. Sarah. She turned to find Marcus Chen, Victor's younger brother and the family's financial strategist, staring at her with undisguised surprise. They'd met twice before at business conferences, brief conversations about municipal bonds and infrastructure investment. He'd been polite but dismissive then, clearly not considering her small firm worth his serious attention. Now his expression held something closer to shock. "Marcus," she said smoothly, extending her hand. "Lovely venue. I didn't realize you were—" He caught himself, shaking her hand with newfound respect. "Of course you're here for the wedding. I heard about your contract. Congratulations. 30 billion is, well, it's extraordinary. Thank you. I'm proud of what my team accomplished. I'm sure Victor would love to speak with you. We've been discussing Chen Industries' infrastructure investments, and your firm keeps coming up in conversations." He glanced toward the house, then back at her. "Does Daniel know you're here?" Sarah smiled, a cold, perfect smile that revealed nothing. "I was invited." Marcus's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. "Right, of course. Well, this should be interesting." She climbed the steps alone, feeling eyes track her movement. The whispers started before she reached the entrance, guests recognizing her face from news coverage, putting together the pieces. "That's Sarah Carter, the infrastructure deal. Isn't she Daniel's ex-wife? Did you know she was coming?" The ceremony was being held in the estate's grand ballroom, temporarily transformed into a wedding venue with thousands of white roses and billowing silk. Sarah slipped into a seat near the back, observing the assembled crowd. She recognized several faces from the business world, a few politicians she'd met with recently, and Rachel's extended family clustered near the front. No one approached her, but everyone watched. Music swelled. The ceremony was beginning. Daniel appeared first, walking down the aisle with Victor Chen. Her ex-husband looked different, thinner, more polished, wearing confidence like an expensive suit. He smiled at guests, soaking in attention, every inch the successful executive he'd always dreamed of becoming. His eyes swept the crowd, performing the casual scan of someone accustomed to being observed. Then he saw her. His face went white, literally drained of color. He stumbled slightly, caught himself, but the smooth confidence shattered. His gaze locked on Sarah with something between disbelief and horror, as if she were a ghost materialized at his happiest moment. She held his stare, her expression neutral, letting him see what he'd discarded. The music continued playing, the processional moving forward, but Daniel couldn't look away. Victor Chen noticed his soon-to-be son-in-law's distraction and followed his gaze. The older man's face registered surprise, then calculation, the quick mental math of a businessman reassessing a situation. He leaned close to Daniel, whispering something urgent. Daniel jerked his attention forward, but his hands were shaking. Rachel appeared next, stunning in vintage lace, her face radiant with joy that would shatter soon enough. She didn't see Sarah at first, too focused on her grand entrance, on the way guests stood and cameras flashed. This was her moment, the fairy tale she'd always wanted. She just had to steal it from her best friend to get it. The ceremony proceeded with painful slowness. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and partnership, words that felt hollow in this context. Daniel's responses came out stiff and mechanical, his eyes darting toward the back of the room every few seconds. Rachel remained oblivious, glowing with happiness, holding her fiancé's shaking hands and attributing his nervousness to normal wedding jitters. Then, just as the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, Victor Chen stood up. The room fell silent. This wasn't protocol. The father of the bride doesn't interrupt his own daughter's wedding. But Victor walked to the front with deliberate purpose, his expression grave. He took the microphone from the confused officiant and turned to address the assembled guests. "I apologize for the interruption," Victor said, his voice carrying authority developed over decades of corporate command. "But there's something everyone here needs to know before this marriage proceeds." He looked directly at Daniel, who'd gone from white to green. 3 weeks ago, I hired a private investigator to conduct a background check on my future son-in-law. Standard procedure for anyone joining our family. What he discovered was illuminating. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rachel's smile faltered, confusion replacing joy. "Daddy, what are you doing?" "I'm protecting you, sweetheart." Victor turned back to the guests. Daniel Chen, or Daniel Carter, as he was known 3 weeks ago, divorced his wife Sarah while their 7-year-old son was dying of leukemia. He abandoned his family to pursue my daughter, specifically because he believed marriage to Rachel would secure him an executive position at Chen Industries. He paused, letting the ugliness of it sink in. What he didn't know, what none of us knew until this week, is that the wife he abandoned for being poor had just won a $30 billion federal contract. She's now worth more than everyone in this room combined. Gasps filled the ballroom. Heads turned towards Sarah, recognition and shock spreading like wildfire. Rachel's face crumbled as she looked from her father to Daniel to the back of the room where Sarah sat, perfectly still. "His son is still in the hospital," Victor continued, his voice hardening. "Michael Carter, age 7, fighting for his life while his father planned this wedding. Daniel hasn't visited him once since filing for divorce. He signed away parental rights to avoid child support obligations, believing his ex-wife would never afford the legal battle to contest it." He looked at Daniel with undisguised contempt. "You traded your dying son for money, except it turns out you already had money. You just didn't know it yet." Daniel tried to speak, but nothing came out. The room watched him implode in real time, watched the man who'd built himself on lies finally collapse under their weight. "Daddy, stop," Rachel begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but this marriage cannot proceed. I won't allow my daughter to bind herself to a man capable of such profound betrayal." Victor set the microphone down and walked back to his seat, leaving devastation in his wake. The officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. "I think perhaps we should take a recess?" But no one moved. Rachel stood frozen at the altar, her wedding dress suddenly looking like a costume, her dreams dissolving in front of 300 witnesses. Daniel seemed to shrink, his carefully constructed facade cracking apart. Guests whispered frantically, pulling out phones, the scandal already spreading beyond these walls. Sarah stood quietly and walked toward the exit. She'd seen enough. As she passed Rachel, their eyes met for the first time since the betrayal. Her former best friend looked destroyed, aged 10 years in 10 minutes, all her certainty replaced by dawning horror. "Sarah," Rachel whispered, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about—" "About the money?" Sarah interrupted softly. "Would it have mattered?" Rachel flinched as if slapped. She had no answer because they both knew the truth. She'd known about Michael. She'd known about the hospital bills and the insurance nightmares and the desperation. She'd chosen Daniel anyway, chosen to betray her best friend for a man who'd abandoned his dying son. The money was irrelevant. The betrayal was what mattered. Sarah continued walking, her heels clicking against marble floors, leaving behind the wreckage of a wedding that should never have happened. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Her phone buzzed with messages, reporters already picking up the story, business contacts reaching out, Jennifer asking if she was okay. She ignored them all and called the hospital instead. "Mrs. Carter," the nurse answered warmly, "I was just about to call you. Dr. Morrison has great news about Michael's latest scans." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling genuine joy pierce through the emotional armor she'd worn all day. "I'm on my way." As her car pulled away from the Chen estate, she didn't look back. Daniel and Rachel would have to live with the consequences of their choices. Victor Chen had done her work for her, exposing the truth more brutally than she ever could have. But that chapter was closed now. What mattered was Michael, was her company, was building a future that honored the strength she'd discovered in herself during the darkest hours. The woman who'd walked into that hospital 3 weeks ago, believing she had nothing, would never have imagined this moment. But the woman driving away from that ruined wedding understood something profound. Betrayal could break you, or it could forge you into something unbreakable. The choice was yours. And Sarah Carter had chosen steel. 6 months passed like scenes from someone else's life, moments so surreal that Sarah sometimes had to pinch herself to confirm they were real. Carter Engineering Solutions went public on a crisp October morning, the stock opening at $42 and climbing to $68 by close, a debut that shattered records and crowned Sarah as one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in American history. But numbers on a screen couldn't capture what mattered most. Michael standing beside her on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, his hand in hers, his body finally free of tubes and monitors, his leukemia in full remission. "Ready, Mom?" Michael asked, his voice stronger now, filled with the energy of a child who cheated death and knew it. "Ready," Sarah whispered, her throat tight with emotion. Together they rang the opening bell, the sound reverberating through the trading floor as cameras flashed and traders cheered. Jennifer stood nearby, beaming with pride, wearing the COO title she'd earned through 18-hour days and unwavering loyalty. And there, surprisingly, stood Rachel Chen, no longer Morrison, watching with genuine happiness that held no trace of the woman who'd once betrayed her. The Rachel who approached Sarah after the ceremony was different from the woman at the wedding. She'd filed for divorce from Daniel the day after the disaster at the Chen estate, moved back to her father's house and spent months in therapy confronting the person she'd become. 2 months ago, she'd shown up at Sarah's office unannounced, not asking for forgiveness, but offering something more valuable: accountability. She donated a significant portion of her trust fund to pediatric cancer research in Michael's name, not as penance but as action. She'd stopped making excuses and started making amends. Sarah hadn't forgiven her, not completely, maybe never completely, but she'd allowed Rachel back into her life in carefully measured doses. Some betrayals could be mended, given enough time and genuine change. Others left scars that never fully faded. She was still determining which category Rachel fell into. "Congratulations," Rachel said now, genuine warmth in her voice. "You did it. Everything you dreamed of." "Not everything," Sarah replied, looking at Michael. "Something better." They moved to a private reception room where champagne flowed, and congratulations came from senators, CEOs, and international investors. Marcus Chen cornered Sarah with a proposal for a joint venture in sustainable infrastructure. Senator Wallace pitched a new federal project that would make the Northeast Corridor look small. A representative from the United Nations discussed global development initiatives. Sarah navigated it all with practiced grace, the skill of someone who'd learned to swim in shark-infested waters. But her mind kept drifting to Daniel. She hadn't seen him since the wedding disaster, though she'd heard stories. He'd been fired from Chen Industries immediately, blacklisted throughout the financial sector, reduced to sending desperate emails to former colleagues who now ignored him. His social media had gone dark 3 months ago. The last she'd heard, he was working at a mid-level consulting firm in a different state, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of his own making. Part of her felt satisfaction at his downfall. A larger part felt nothing at all. The emotional numbness that comes when someone who once mattered becomes irrelevant. Daniel had been her husband, her partner, the father of her child. Now he was just a cautionary tale about greed and poor judgment. "Mom, can we go see Dad?" Sarah froze. Michael stood beside her, his expression hopeful and heartbreaking. "Sweetie, we've talked about this." "I know, but—" Michael twisted his hands together. "He sent me a card. For my birthday. He said he's sorry and he wants to see me. Just once." Sarah's protective instincts flared. "Michael, your father made choices that hurt us both. I don't want him to hurt you again. He's still my dad," Michael said simply, with the innocent logic of a child who couldn't understand how a parent could choose absence. "I just want to know why. Why he left." Jennifer, overhearing, touched Sarah's arm gently. "Maybe controlled contact? Your terms? Your supervision?" Sarah wanted to say no, wanted to protect Michael from more disappointment, but she saw the need in her son's eyes, the questions that wouldn't go away just because she wished them to. And maybe, just maybe, Michael deserved the closure that Sarah herself had never needed. 2 weeks later, Sarah sat on a park bench in Riverside Park while Michael played on the swings, his laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. The park was nearly empty, leaves crunching underfoot, the city quiet for a Sunday morning. She checked her watch. 10:03 a.m. Daniel was late. Of course he was late. Then she saw him approaching from the west entrance, and her breath caught. He looked terrible, gaunt, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes that didn't fit right anymore. This wasn't the polished executive from the wedding or the ambitious climber from their marriage. This was a man who'd lost everything and knew it. "Sarah," he said, stopping a respectful distance away, "thank you for agreeing to this." "I'm not doing this for you," she said flatly. "Michael wanted to see you. You have 30 minutes. "Michael," Daniel's voice cracked. He looked toward the playground where his son played, and something broke across his face. God, he looked so healthy. The treatment worked? "Full remission. No thanks to you." Daniel flinched but didn't argue. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, no right to even be here, but I need you to know, I never meant to hurt him. I was just so convinced that I was drowning, that staying meant losing everything, that marrying Rich was more important than your dying son," Sarah interrupted. "Say it plainly, Daniel. Own what you did." He looked at her then, really looked at her, seeing the woman she'd become. "I was a coward. I saw you struggling and I panicked. I thought if I could just get ahead, just make enough money, I could fix everything. But the harder I worked, the more you seemed to manage without me. And when Rachel showed interest," he trailed off, shame written across his features, "I convinced myself I deserved happiness, that I'd earned the right to choose my own future. While your son fought for his life. While my son fought for his life," Daniel repeated, the words like broken glass. "There's no excuse. There's no justification. I traded my family for an illusion, and I lost everything that mattered." Sarah watched Michael on the swings, soaring higher with each pump of his legs, fearless in the way only children who've survived the unsurvivable can be. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, broken and desperate in that hospital room. She thought about the empire she'd built from that breaking point, and she realized something profound. She didn't hate Daniel anymore. She pitied him. "You didn't lose your family, Daniel," she said quietly. "You traded it, and you got exactly what you bargained for. Nothing. Can I see him, just for a few minutes?" Sarah considered it, weighing Michael's needs against her own protective instincts. Finally, she nodded. You get 15 minutes. You don't make promises you can't keep. You don't play the victim. You give him honesty, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts. Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face now, and walked toward the playground. Sarah watched him crouch down as Michael ran over, watched her son's cautious joy at seeing his father, watched them sit together on the bench and talk. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Michael's expressions change. Confusion, hurt, then something like understanding. Whatever Daniel was telling him, he was at least being honest. 20 minutes later, Sarah had given him the extra time. Daniel walked back alone. Michael had returned to the swings, processing whatever his father had said. "He's an amazing kid," Daniel said. "You raised him well." "I raised him alone," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." "I know." Daniel looked at her with desperate eyes. "I know I have no right to ask, but is there any possibility, could I ever be part of his life again, in some small way?" Sarah stood gathering her bag. She looked at this man who'd once been everything to her, and now was less than nothing. She thought about revenge, about denying him, about making him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused. But then she thought about Michael, about the boy who still somehow believed in second chances. "That's not my decision to make," she said finally. "Michael knows how to reach you now. If he wants a relationship with you, I won't stand in his way. But you'll have to earn it, Daniel, every single moment. And if you hurt him again, there won't be a third chance." "I understand. Sarah, I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry." She nodded once and walked away, heading toward Michael, who jumped off the swing and ran to meet her. "Ready to go, Mom." "Ready. Did you get what you needed?" Michael thought about it. "Yeah, Dad explained some things. He said he made really bad choices because he was scared, and that sometimes grown-ups mess up really bad." He paused. "He said you were the strongest person he ever knew, and he was too weak to stand beside you." Sarah's eyes burned. That was honest of him. "Are you still mad at him?" She considered the question carefully. "No, sweetie, I'm not mad anymore. I'm just done. But if you want to see him again sometime, we can talk about it." Michael nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. They walked hand in hand toward the park exit, toward the car that would take them back to their penthouse, back to their life that no longer needed Daniel or Rachel or anyone else's validation. Sarah Carter had become an empire unto herself, and that empire had room for forgiveness, but only on her terms. As they drove past the buildings that now seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating, Sarah glanced at her son in the rearview mirror. He was reading one of the books Rachel had brought him last week, a collection of stories about resilience and hope. Some bridges could be rebuilt, she realized. Others were better left burned. The wisdom was knowing the difference. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Board meeting Tuesday to discuss the Singapore expansion. Also, you're on the cover of Forbes. From hospital hallways to market dominance." "Pretty badass," Sarah smiled. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, forgotten, discarded as worthless. Now she was unavoidable, undeniable, a testament to what happened when you underestimated a woman with nothing left to lose. Daniel and Rachel had given her the greatest gift possible. They'd shown her she was stronger alone than she ever was with them. The best revenge she'd learned wasn't destruction, it was construction. It was building something so magnificent from the ruins of betrayal that even your enemies had to admire the architecture. It was rising so high that those who'd pushed you down had to crane their necks just to glimpse your shadow. And Sarah Carter was just getting started.